Is that okay with you? Hi, I'm Juliette Berger. I'm Washington Audubon's president. And Happy New Year again. I welcome all of you to our Zoom presentation. We're super excited to have Andy Johnson here, and Mike will be introducing him in just a little bit. Welcome any new members we may have. Also, if you are interested in becoming a member, it's very easy to purchase a membership. It's super affordable, and you can do that on our website, washtenawaudubon.org. Go to the membership or donate page. Of course, you don't have to be a member to be able to participate in almost all of our events, field trips, and programs. Although we do have a winter field trip to the UP coming up. We're leaving on Friday this week, and that is one where you do have to be a member. But other than that, generally for our local trips and for all of our programs, membership is optional, but we do appreciate your membership. So it's important to us that everyone in our community knows that they're welcome as part of our community, and we've been working really hard to make sure that folks understand that we are committed to diversity and equity and inclusion. And we want you all to know that the birds that Washington Audubon pledges to protect differ in color, size, behavior, and geographical preference in countless other ways. And as we honor and celebrate the equally remarkable diversity of the human species, Washington Audubon considers the work of inclusion, diversity, and equity a top priority moving forward. We hope that in doing so, we can bring new creativity and energy to our work in Washtenaw County and beyond for birds and people alike. So respect, inclusion, and opportunity for people of all backgrounds, lifestyles, and perspectives will attract the best ideas and harness the greatest passion to shape a healthier, more vibrant future for all of us who share our planet. We believe that protecting and conserving nature and the environment transcends political, cultural, and social boundaries. And as an organization, we're committed to increasing the diversity of our board, our volunteers, members, and supporters. As an organization, Washtenaw Audubon strives to create a sense of community where all people can feel safe to explore nature and experience the wonder of birds. We respect the individuality of each member of our community and welcome all without discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, age, sexual orientation, gender, identity and expression, disability, national or ethnic origin, political affiliation, or veteran status, or any other status. All are welcome to bird with us, learn with us, and to share our passion for birds and the environment. And again, I'm Juliette Berger, and I use she, her pronouns. Any other announcements that people have from the board members who are on the call here? No. Matt, do you want to let us know what field trips you have planned for us going forward?
Sure. You mentioned the Birding the UP trip this coming weekend, and then I won't go through everything individually. Is Victor on the call today? I didn't see his name.
I haven't seen him, no.
I don't see Victor.
I'll mention the BIPOC walk as well. So just generally, and I'll drop two links in the chat, one for our events page on our website and one for the events page on Facebook. Whichever is most convenient for you is probably the best place to check back. I have events posted through March. There's some that go a little past that, and then I'll be updating soon for the next quarter. But generally speaking, we'll have a weekend walk at least every other weekend, if not more frequently. Our Thursday walks at the Arb will begin the last Thursday in March and continue through May, and that's all up on the website. Couple of other highlights. The Great Backyard Bird Count starts this weekend on the 18th, on Friday. So I just wanted to remind folks of that. We do have some information, just basically stolen from Audubon that's on our website that will guide you to where you need to go to get all the resources you need if you want to participate in that. It's a great thing to do. We have the One Road Challenge coming up on March 12th. And again, there's information on the website about that. That's more of a team event where you get a team of a few people together and pick a road, and from midnight to 11 a.m. see how many birds you can see. It's really a lot of fun. And then lastly, I'll mention we had recently had our first BIPOC walk, Black, Indigenous, and People of Color walk. And from what I hear, it was very successful, and we are really excited about it. And Victor Chen, who is our education chair, is organizing those, and he has another one scheduled on March 26th at Kensington Metro Park Nature Center. And again, that's on the website. It's at 9 a.m. And I did want to highlight that as well. And lastly, I am easy to find, Matthew Spohr, and I am open to suggestions. If anybody wants to lead bird walks, right now it's been Juliet and I mainly, but I would really love to engage with any of you if you're interested in giving me your opinion or offering help or any of the above. So thank you.
Thanks a lot, Matt. I'm really excited for the upcoming field trips. I know you have one coming up in the first weekend of March as well, somewhere around town. And so I hope people will make sure and check those out and attend if you can. I'm going to turn things over to Mike. Mike, do you want to talk about our upcoming programs and introduce Andy for us? Mike Sefton. You're muted, Mike. There you go.
All better, yes. Our March program will be by Keith Dickey, and will be on the birds of the Southwest. Our April and May programs will be announced shortly, hopefully.
Oh,
Our June-
Mike, our April program is the Birding is for Everyone program that Victor set up with some folks from Wisconsin, from Madison Audubon. It's inclusivity. There are two BIPOC birders who are going to be presenting that for us. I don't remember their names, but it should be really great.
Yep, thanks. Our June program will be by Don Chalfant. Will be one of his entertaining and illuminating programs. And that's what we have for now.
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
And Andy?
Andy, oh boy. Yeah, I'm really, really glad to see you, Andy, and looking forward to this program. Andy grew up in Ann Arbor and was Washtenaw Audubon's young birders when he was in high school. He was encouraged in his birding by his parents, Sue and Kevin. Sue served as a Washtenaw Audubon president. He went to Cornell, where he studied nesting whimbrels on the tundra. And he's now a multimedia producer for the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. Please welcome Andy Johnson.
Thank you, Mike. Yeah, it's fun to be back here with so many very familiar, friendly faces, and a lot of mentors and people that encouraged me all along the way and taught me a lot of things. And it's fun to be back. Just wish it was in Ann Arbor at the Botanical Gardens, but someday. Let's see. Yeah, I'm gonna dive right in. I'm gonna talk about sort of this DeVoe Bank Whimbrel project that I've been working on for the last couple of years for the Cornell Lab, and I'm kind of cramming a lot into this one, so I'm gonna try to keep it quick, get through things so we can leave a little bit of time, hopefully, to just sort of answer some questions and chat through things. So sharing screen, optimizing for video, sound.
Well, just as a reminder, please everyone mute yourselves, except for Andy, of course.
All right. Is that showing up? I can't see Zoom now, so I'll be in the blind.
Looks
but
great.
Yeah, cool. All right. Right. So DeVoe Bank, let's see. I'll sort of start. I'm going to talk about this particular island, this discovery of this roost for whimbrels that I know some of you are familiar with. So some of this will be redundant to things you may have already seen, but hopefully we'll put it in some context. I'm going to just sort of give an intro to our unit that works on these things and sort of talk about this particular project through the lens of that approach of how we try to tackle our projects. So yeah, our group at the Lab of Ornithology is called the Center for Conservation Media, and essentially, separate from sort of a communications team, we're sort of specifically charged with partnering externally, primarily with different groups, whether they're agencies or individuals or communities, NGOs, partnering on sort of pressing conservation topics around the world. Birds are typically sort of our foot in the door, but it's about more than just the birds, and really targeting scenarios where there's a partner that's on the ground that has an existing strategy and really needs the support of communication tools, and we sort of try to step in and bridge some of those gaps to sort of better implement the latest science, better implement sort of strategies that are on the ground to reach key audiences. So we work with, like I said, a wide range of different types of partners in different types of scenarios. And we sort of work through this process of beginning with a partnership that's really core to what we do. And then sort of thinking backwards. So we, unlike sort of a film production company that's making a film for an audience or for distribution, we're sort of working backwards in terms of orienting towards a target outcome, and sort of the long-term and the near-term outcomes, sort of a strategy that takes shape around those, guided by those partners, and really trying to figure out exactly who needs to be, influenced and reached and targeted with these communications tools, and ultimately that's then sort of informing what we're making. So yeah, I think a lot of it's supported by a lot of research and sort of background on a topic, but a lot of times the partner really is sort of our key to fleshing out an understanding of kind of the unpublished realities on the ground, that we can't glean from our own homework. So that's really key to this, and in this case, certainly more than ever, with a partnership with the South Carolina Department of Natural Resources. So one of these sort of pressing conservation challenges out there that we've taken a swing at is the big picture of sort of long distance shorebird migration. We've worked in different parts of the world on this topic, and this DeVoe Bank project is part of sort of our early effort to tackle the Atlantic Flyway. And so DeVoe Bank is this little pinprick on the map there within the middle of the Atlantic Flyway that stretches from sort of Arctic Alaska and Canada down to Tierra del Fuego in southern South America. And so this is this little barrier island about 20 miles south of Charleston. You can see Charleston in the middle picture there, so really close. And it's at the mouth of the North Edisto River, and this basically presents this opportunity at this small place for really local decisions, local management outcomes to have this outsized impact on the entire flyway population of species, and several species, but of whimbrel in particular in this case. And so whimbrel, as a lot of you know, are this really special type of long distance migratory shorebird, and these are birds that are breeding in the Arctic, wintering down in South America, and they're part of this group of longer distance migratory shorebirds that are declining faster than most groups of birds in the world. And we know where birds in general are having a hard time for the most part, and we've lost 3 billion birds across our continent in the last 40 years or so, and last 40 or 50 years, and that's about 1 in 3 individuals. So that's part of this really broad pattern of decline and sort of this loss of habitat and collapse of ecosystems. And shorebirds are one of the groups that's really sort of unfortunately leading some of that charge of decline. And curlews in particular are, again, kind of even within the shorebirds, they're some of the most rapidly declining. So let's see, there are 9 species of curlew worldwide. I think that's the right count. And 2 of those already have gone extinct. And of the 7 remaining, whimbrel all of them are essentially rapidly declining and in significant levels of concern. And whimbrel are one of the more abundant still of the remaining curlews. So there's about 40,000 individuals in the eastern population. So this is sort of this group breeding sort of from that oval on the screen south and sort of in that eastern chunk of the breeding range. And those 40,000 birds are flying through the mid-Atlantic coast, basically focused on these 2 points on the map here, sort of passing through the Delmarva Peninsula region and the Georgia Bight, which is sort of this, one continuous arc of the coast from sort of roughly the northern South Carolina through northern Florida. And there's been essentially this species in particular has seen 50% declines. That was in this study from 94 to 2009. And just recently in 2020, they came out with an update on that sampling, that continuous data set that confirmed that since 2009, that steady rate of decline, 4% per year, has continued. So we're looking at basically 70% fewer whimbrel than we had in just 1994. So a really sort of urgent story and an interesting opportunity too, in that this is a bird that's just like the Eskimo curlew, which we've lost in our Atlantic flyways. One of those 2 extinct curlews looks very similar, sounds very similar, and yet we still have them, and we still have tens of thousands of them. So that's sort of where we're diving into this story. And for me, this started, as Mike had alluded to, during my undergrad, studying whimbrel on their breeding grounds in Churchill. And so this is that sort of first part of their life cycle, where they're hatching out of these little camouflaged eggs on the tundra. And Washtenaw Audubon Society, this was, supported the work to go up there and do that research when I was an undergrad and take these photos. And then, they're stitching together whole parts of the Western Hemisphere, northern and southern, and relying on these vastly disparate and diverse landscapes and habitats along the way, sort of moving from the tundra through salt marsh and oyster bars in the mid-Atlantic, as seen in this picture, and then down through mangroves in South America, Brazil and the Guyanas. And so our story mostly in this case focuses on that little pinprick DeVoe Bank. And it's a spit of sand less than a mile long, like I said, a little bit south of Charleston. So this popular place, there's a community there this is at dusk before the lights come on, so you don't quite see it, but Seabrook Island is a developed community right there next to DeVoe Bank. So really this place that's kind of hiding this spectacle in plain sight. So again, partnerships are really where we begin all this work, and Felicia Sanders is the lead coastal biologist and land manager for South Carolina Department of Natural Resources. We knew each other from that fieldwork in Churchill. She came up to Churchill one of the seasons, and yeah, it sort of pointed us down to visit her in South Carolina, and she had pointed out that she had gotten stranded actually out at DeVoe Bank. There's a funny story there for another time, but she accidentally stumbled across this incredible spectacle of thousands of whimbrel coming into DeVoe Bank under cover of darkness. And she was by herself. She didn't have any means to count this, but she knew that it was something significant and sort of unprecedented. The numbers that she was seeing were not known to be there for Whimbrel. So she gathered a team to survey that roost in 2019. She had told us about it and asked that we come down and document that survey and ideally that roost. So we joined those efforts in 2019 to potentially film the spectacle and help really back up their findings, because what she had suspicions were there was just sort of beyond belief. So I have a real quick excerpt here from this is just a rough internal report video that we put together right after that first shoot in 2019. I'm just sharing this one because it's a sort of gives one glimpse into some of the behind the scenes effort there on DeVoe to actually film some of the shots that we'll see in a minute. So for 3 weeks in May, actually, and real quick, Matt Aberhard is the one that you'll see in this little segment. He's one of the world's best wildlife cinematographers, and we were really lucky to have him on this shoot. You've seen his work if you've seen Our Planet or any of these sort of landmark BBC and Netflix wildlife series. He's been filming a lot of those sequences. So for 3 weeks in May, cameraman Matt Aberhard and I camped out on DeVoe Bank with the goal of really capturing the massive scale and importance of this roost.
The objective tonight is to try to catch arrivals on a rising tide at the right stage of the sun, because the sun at the minute is blindingly hot. I mean, this is South Carolina, it's not even North Carolina, it is hot here. So filming Whimbrels now is not ideal. The key is to get large numbers of Whimbrels arriving in the right place at the right state of the tide and the right state of the sun. And that is the tricky part of this exercise. It's a Venn diagram in its simplest form: birds, light, tide, and that little intersection. That's what we're aiming for. That's the sweet spot.
All right, so that's Matt. Let's see. So the first thing that we put together, and actually I'm gonna, yeah, there we go. Okay, just checking what's coming next there. So I'll screen this announcement film. This was sort of the first thing that we put together, and this sort of drops us right into sort of the night of that census where all this came together, essentially following over the shoulder of the biologist Felicia and her team that were doing the counting. So I'll play that.
I think most people just see a sandbar and maybe some birds flying over it, but they don't realize the incredible bird life that lives and roosts there. I've been going to DeVoe for decades, and we go during the day to monitor the pelicans, the terns, some of the shorebirds that nest there.
Oh my gosh.
But it's very rare that I go to DeVoe at night.
There's so many. The point, it looks black, but those are actually all Whimbrel.
I started realizing there's maybe a lot more going on at night than we see during the day.
Oh my gosh.
DeVoe Bank is a large sandbar. It's actually shaped like a horseshoe. In the interior are broad marshes and some dunes, some grasses, some low shrubs. It has wide, fairly exposed beaches. A couple years ago, I was anchoring the boat on the backside, and I just happened to be there right at dawn. I could just hear swirls of birds passing over my head. Thousands of Whimbrel came off the island. I was just amazed. I thought, how had I never seen this before? I realized it needed further investigation and documentation. A whimbrel is a type of curlew. It has a long decurved bill for probing in the sand for crabs and invertebrates. And it's a long-distance migrant.
They are spending 6-7 months of the year down on the northern coast of South America. And then they're making this jump up to the Atlantic coast of the US. From there, they're making flights up to their Arctic breeding grounds. We're talking days, sometimes even a week, without stopping, without food, without sleep. What that means, though, is that the places that they do choose to stop are really critically important.
On the northern migration, a lot of the whimbrels stop in South Carolina for a month and a half. That whole system of marshes and undeveloped coastline is critical to the survival of this species. They spread out all across the coast throughout the day to forage in the mudflats, and then they come together to spend the night. And in South Carolina, that's at DeVoe Bank.
It's May 16th, and it's pretty close to a full moon, so the tides are extreme, and the whimbrel will be concentrated at a few spots. So it's a really great time to count them.
So Abbey Station at the southwest point of DeVoe, kind of on the sand spit, the very tip. We're kind of right in the middle, looking for the birds coming mostly from northeast. Here come our first big group. Maybe about 80 just came in.
These birds could theoretically be coming in from a tremendous distance away. As the tide rises and night falls, they're leaving those foraging areas where they've been eating all day and coming out to these areas that are a little bit more remote where they're safe from predators. That was another 40 that just came in.
Curlews worldwide are the group of birds that we know is prone to extinction, and whimbrel are among those.
So this group here is like 180 flying over us right now.
Somewhere around 40,000 whimbrel use the Atlantic flyway of North America.
Hundreds and hundreds of whimbrels over the marsh.
That population already represents a decline of about half from where they were 20 years ago.
By now, there's literally thousands of birds all around us. It's the craziest thing I've ever seen. 207. We won't be able to count them much longer because it's just too hard to see them. But you can hear them calling still as they're coming in. There's another group. And another group. Oh my gosh. The entire point all the way to those signs is covered in birds now.
We were all tallying our numbers, and it took quite a while to go through our notes.
64, 175.
I remember I wrote down the numbers from all the parties.
140, 700.
And could not believe it.
65, 400, 750, 207.
Holy moly.
It's a lot of birds.
A lot of whimbrel.
Yeah. It was about 19,500 birds.
That blew my mind, because that's half, literally half, of estimates of how many whimbrel there are on the Atlantic coast. For all of them to be coming in to roost on this one tiny island, that blew my mind. We've never encountered this many whimbrel in any one spot anywhere else in the world. That is unique. That means that DeVoe is a really special place.
A discovery of this size really seemed impossible. How could there be a half of the estimated population at one place? And personally, in my backyard in South Carolina.
There are certain things that we should refuse to destroy, and those things that we should refuse to destroy, those things that really define us, that make us unique, that bring us together. And in South Carolina, by preserving those places, we have refused to destroy the best part of us. We've created good habitat for Whimbrel to give them a chance, and we just have a responsibility to do what we can to keep them from becoming extinct, because we know that the future of that species is in our hands.
We know how the decline of Whimbrel potentially ends. We know how that story could end. But their population size is still large enough at this moment that we have the time to do something before it's too late.
Seeing thousands of Whimbrel come into roost at night, it kind of just gives you hope that, so many birds exist. It's one of the most phenomenal sights I've ever seen in my life.
I don't think there's anybody that doesn't love a beautiful thing. You don't even have to know what they're called, what the birds are. And you watch them come in on that sunset. And you have to be amazed, you have to be astounded. And you have to be proud to know that that's here.
Just gonna pause on the last frame here for a second. The thing I always mention when we land on this frame, it strikes me every time, is that this spectacle in this one shot is something that quite literally hadn't been witnessed by humans for about a century. To see this many curlews in one single place, and it's sort of a glimpse of 1900 and before, just coming right out of the darkness in this unexpected place that today it's only possible on this one particular spit of sand hidden in plain sight under cover of darkness. So a pretty spectacular thing for Felicia to come across and sort of bring to the rest of the world. And I'll just mention real quick, aside of sort of a couple phone photos here of Matt getting in position to get that particular shot. We spent many weeks sort of at this spot filming Whimbrel, and you see a lot of shots of flocks of Whimbrel flying in to kind of come in throughout the evening. As you see Abby doing that census and Felicia, they're counting dozens at a time, at most hundreds at a time. And so as a filmmaker tasked with documenting 20,000, half of the remaining population coming into one place, you can film all those flocks of hundreds until you're dizzy, but you're not really accomplishing what this single shot accomplishes. So that was Matt digging out this hole, lying in the sand at the high tide line. This was the afternoon before. So we dug him in, covered him back up with sand, and he laid there overnight with the tide coming up, so that at dawn, the pool of water where the Whimbrel were standing was, 6 or 8 feet in front of him. A pretty crazy effort for that one, and really tied the rest of that effort together. So that announcement film really sort of captures the thrust of what this project set out to do. But I'm throwing this slide up, not to sort of read through it per se, but this goes back to that structure at the beginning of how we strategically approach all of our projects. And, ultimately a key part of the job beyond that sort of natural history effort of digging into the sand is really the work that happens before and the work that happens afterwards with our partners to really understand the context of how something's going to be used, how something's going to be impacted. And so we learned through these conversations over time that if we wanted to sort of accomplish this relatively straightforward objective of protecting this particular place and using it as an example for others like it, we really needed to strengthen, manage. We sort of had a series of things to accomplish. There were some key audiences, the DNR board that sort of makes DNR management decisions, and then the state legislature that affects policy. And we knew that in order to sort of increase some of the protections on paper and in practice, we really needed this point number 2. We needed local, public and political support for shorebird conservation, because a lot of these management actions that would be helpful just didn't have the support, didn't have the momentum to get through for the last decade or more. So that then shapes these outputs. We had this public announcement film, but then really knew that strategically we needed to have a coordinated press push to get some of this out there and build external validation of how important this story was to come across people's desks in South Carolina government. So I think that's the gist of what was important to get across there. And this sort of started with building a public building a launch event, an announcement event around this film. So that was June of 2021 that we had this in-person event, sort of co-sponsored by this group of partners in state. And really the goal here was a celebration of common ground. I think Drew Lanham's line at the end of that film sums it up really neatly when he says, "I don't think there's anybody that doesn't love a beautiful thing." And so that was really that was basically the strategic theory behind the edit. The particular script and edit of that announcement film was built for this kind of room with this kind of audience in it that brought together people from across the political spectrum, conservation leaders, legislative leaders, and local press in South Carolina, in Charleston. That was sort of what that was designed to do. So at this event, it sort of greased the wheels for a lot of the conversations that have been happening since and that couldn't have happened before. Governor's chief of staff was there. There were a lot of sort of senior DNR administrators and congressmen in this room that are welcomed into sort of this shared opportunity. And that was sort of the goal here, to recognize this opportunity to rally around this beautiful thing, as Drew says. So that then pivoted into sort of this national effort to get national validation. So it wasn't just a South Carolina thing, but for South Carolinians to see how special at a national and an international scale this spectacle was. So we used that announcement film as part of a pitch to the New York Times that writer Deborah Kramer made. She's the author of The Narrow Edge, which is a great book about red knots and horseshoe crabs, worth a read. And so we complemented this New York Times treatment and with our media that we had. And that's, again, part of what we're trying to do is a particular investment, a strategic investment in covering something like this, and then putting strategic outputs in the right places, reversioning that effort into different forms. CBS Sunday Morning covered this. It was the same kind of thing where we were pitching CBS Sunday Morning to cover this story and feature Felicia and her discovery, to, again, have that kind of validation. And longtime correspondent Martha Teichner, who was the one who reported on this story, coincidentally is a part-time resident of Seabrook Island, which is that community that you can see in that aerial photo of DeVoe Bank. So she's minutes away from DeVoe Bank herself, and I think really was able to connect with that audience that way. On the CBS front, we also coordinated with them to sort of coordinate the timing of their national broadcast to coincide with some key parts of the South Carolina legislative cycle. So they aired that on September 12th, and we heard in that week that the governor of South Carolina had seen it and, reached out to DNR and congratulated them on their work. And the DNR board are a group that's appointed by the governor, 6 individuals appointed by the governor. So to have the governor seeing this story, sort of calling out to DNR and congratulating them on the importance of this discovery, and it all underscores the importance of managing it well into the future. So that same week, there was a vote taken, sort of a preliminary vote that unanimously put forward some new regulations that would better protect migratory shorebirds. So those are currently sort of working through state legislature. So yeah, a couple future directions. There's lots more to come just in the months ahead for DeVoe. I think we're going into that next spring season where they're gonna be managing the island again in terms of visitation, and so that'll be interesting to see how this goes, and so there's lots more to come for DeVoe, and I think we're looking at this point in sort of 2 directions: to one, broaden some of the scope, turn DeVoe Bank not into the end of the story, but the beginning of a story that's more sort of flyway wide, and then to sort of touch on, continue to develop this convergence of social and ecological dimensions of this part of the world and this landscape. So for that first point, I think we're really hoping to sort of elevate DeVoe Bank as an exemplar of a network of roost habitats, ephemeral offshore habitats that the Atlantic Flyway relies on. And these are those rare places that are population limiting for these shorebirds. So this past spring, we spent some time filming some new work that's not in those films yet, that we're basically tagging along with Felicia and Maina Handmaker and Nathan Center, some researchers from the University of South Carolina. And they're doing some tracking work, some putting out new GPS tags that are getting this incredible resolution, spatial temporal resolution, taking hundreds of locations per day. So they're really looking not at sort of the flyway scale necessarily of where birds are going between Canada and Brazil, but looking at sort of this daily micro migration that's happening while these birds are in South Carolina, moving from DeVoe Bank out through the salt marsh and through the surrounding habitat. So I have, let's see. Yep, these are the little towers that those tags are communicating with. And we have a piece here that I think this was my audible to decide whether to skip this one or not based on time. I think we're running a little short on time, but another piece that's sort of working on animating the tracking data that they're looking at. And I've got a short version of it. So let me just play the end of this, the ending excerpt of this film that has data animations tracking those movements. So this is just a quick minute here.
Human development and disturbance, increasing storm surge, and rising seas have made offshore refuges for shorebirds exceedingly rare. Without DeVoe Bank, 20,000 whimbrel would have nowhere else to go. The habitats across South Carolina's Ace Basin are critical for sustaining a flyway that connects hemispheres. But data from individual whimbrel show that DeVoe Bank is not only an island refuge, but a pivotal hub crucial to the function of this entire landscape. Across the Atlantic and Gulf coasts, the offshore roost sites that remain are vital pillars of the Atlantic Flyway. In order to sustain this rich natural heritage of hemispheric migrations, we must preserve the network of ephemeral shoals and undeveloped barrier islands that still exist alongside our own coastal communities.
So this is sort of another follow-up that's starting to tackle a new framework of sort of audiences and outcomes, and again, kind of expanding geographic scope. So, if you look at this map, this is sort of animating sort of the best available tracking data that looks at nocturnal roost sites for whimbrel across the entire flyway, and you can see how rare and few and far between these types of habitats are that sort of meet these Goldilocks standards for what a shorebird can use as the safe roost, that's large enough to stay above high tide, small enough to not be developed, essentially, places like DeVoe Bank. So we're actually looking now at using this film where the announcement film sort of just builds some of that, again, builds the opportunity for shared win-win conservation, and sort of puts that forward to kind of build some initial momentum. This piece is more about building some of the ecological case for more of the decision-making audiences downstream, to say that managing for these types of habitats is really critical at a national and international scale. One of the key places that we're going with this is starting to collaborate with the Army Corps of Engineers, who have a lot of opportunities across all of our coasts, to actually build and maintain islands like DeVoe Bank, build new ones. That's sort of a new story that we're working on, is filming a project right here at this next dot down in Georgia, where they're essentially constructing new islands that sort of follow the DeVoe Bank recipe. So that's one place we're going. And then sort of on this second point, let's see. I mean, I think one of the things that I love about working in this realm of media and storytelling is that there's space to explore beyond these other pieces that we've looked at, to explore beyond the data and the ecology of a place or system, and to recognize that while a scientific understanding of those ecosystems is absolutely essential, that conservation as an activity is fundamentally a human endeavor, and it's in response to human histories, human values, and being successful at protecting these landscapes for birds and for ourselves, it has to take into account all of these subjective realities of emotions and politics and culture. And we're up against ourselves in that endeavor. So this project had the exciting opportunity to work on exploring some of that with this interview with Dr. Drew Lanham, who's a renowned poet and ornithologist based at Clemson University, grew up in South Carolina. So there's another piece here that I just want to show in the last couple minutes here that is taking a deeper dive just with Drew. We filmed a number of these interviews for this announcement film that we just watched, and Drew being one of them. And I wanted Drew, we set up that interview because we needed someone who could convey the emotional weight of 20,000 curlews taking flight, and not just by sort of citing population estimates and percentages of decline and things like that, but someone who had the poetic ability to really convey how special that site is emotionally. So Drew has that local connection and the ability to put those things in words, but then that conversation, went other directions as well. So I'm just going to play this piece. This is about 10 minutes, just under 10 minutes. That's just this sort of excerpts of this interview with Drew Lanham.
I surround myself with extinct birds because it's a reminder of what was. I can think about the history of those birds, but I can also connect the history of those birds to my ancestors who worked some of these fields and who helped to build this country as bondaged people, who probably looked skyward to see endless flocks of birds that provided inspiration in many ways for liberation. I grew up in a little county in the western Piedmont called Edgefield. Edgefield is nestled against the Savannah River, and I grew up on a family farm, so birds were best friends and confidants. To imagine that bird flying through the air for thousands of miles, and as that bird's flying, it's being pulled by memory, by instinct, by stars, by all of the things that we know and many that we don't know that causes it to settle or to go on. That Wimbrel's eye view, that Wimbrel could look down and see DeVoe Bank and recognize that landscape as a safe resting place, as a place to refuel for the rest of the trip so that it can make more of itself. That's an emotional thing to me, and it's something to be proud of. And it's something for us to hold on to. It's something for us to fight for. Part of the miracle is that these birds can travel thousands of miles, that they are dodging storms and peregrine falcons and all kinds of things that they've been built for. They've been built for that. What worries me are those factors that they haven't been built for. We think about the past and what must have been of evening skies being darkened by Wimbrel and plover and other shorebirds coming in to roost in a place that we marvel over tens of thousands, that at some point in time there were hundreds of thousands and millions, means that we've exacted an enormous toll on our environment. When I think about that bird, all of that time and effort, that evolutionary miracle compressed into that Wimbrel, it delivers a different sort of motivation for wanting to conserve. Part of the reason that it's important for me to work for home, for my Southern home, is because I believe it has to happen here. I believe recognition, reconciliation, and reparation has to happen here. It has to happen here. The recognition of what occurred, that the nation was built on the backs of others and on this pain. It wasn't just a Southern thing, but here in South Carolina, it was so evident, and it still exists on the landscape. The reparations come in seeing, in part, the nature that exists on top of that pain and despair. That nature is reclaiming what was torn apart. That the birds are sort of these wonderful messengers that help us resolve to be better. That we can gather around those birds and we can say, this is what was. It was terrible. We ought never let that happen again. That instead of seeing brown backs bent over furrows, we can watch the feathered backs of birds probing crabs from burrows. I want us to gather around nature in these ways. If it happens here in the South, then there's hope for everywhere. The disparate histories of black and white, of enslaved and free, of land owner and being bound to land by force, that history can't be denied. It can't be shut out. And we can't just watch birds without that history in mind. And so it's important from time to time to take your binoculars down and to see the wider view. The wetlands we conserve, the forests that we conserve, there ought to be a way to inspire people to understand that partnerships with people matter. Culture matters. Those great rice fields and rice marsh in the South Carolina Low Country and the Ace Basin are places of great pain. In some ways now are redeemed as places of great beauty where birds fly free. And so that flyway is tied together not just in space, but in time. And it's up to us now to determine what happens in the future. We have some of that control, and it's our obligation to exercise it. To go from 1 to a dozen to tens of thousands is jaw-dropping. It's overwhelming in the best way, because I didn't know that that still happened, that that still existed for something like a whimbrel. Seeing this is like some great discovery. It's sort of almost like a de-extinction. Emily Dickinson talks about hope being the thing with feathers. This is the prime exemplar of that. I don't think there's anybody that doesn't love a beautiful thing. And what those tens of thousands of birds are, you can close your eyes in those calls. And you have to be amazed, you have to be astounded. And you have to be proud to know that that's here.
All right. Well, there's really nothing to be gained by talking more after Drew Lanham. So the one thing I'll sort of close with before questions, if we've got some time, is to sort of point you to this essay that Drew wrote called A Convergent Imagining. Just a couple little excerpts there, but basically it's this thought experiment where he wrote imagined letters between Dr. Martin Luther King and Rachel Carson, and just sort of puts forward a blueprint for us now of this convergent grand vector of social justice and environmental justice and conservation kind of forming together and being inseparable and intertwined. So a really worthwhile read where he just lays out that vision that I think touches on everything that needs to be done in the next century. So pretty cool. That's about it. Just stop the screen sharing. Actually, I might, yeah, no, I'll stop screen sharing because I can't see anyone. But maybe we can take some questions and I can go back to slides if we need them.
Hi. Oh, can I ask about hurricane season and what happens to that sand pit?
Yeah. It is, always threatened. I'm trying to remember the year. I think it was 1979 that was the last hurricane that completely wiped DeVoe Bank out. I mean, it was not there anymore. Obviously it's a very marginal spit of land, but it's also significant. So for it to be completely gone is takes quite a storm. So certainly doesn't happen all that often. That particular part of the coast in the last several decades has not usually been right in the path of most of them, but that's one of the main reasons for looking at that sort of broader network of places like it, and of engaging the Army Corps of Engineers to be ready to either replenish DeVoe Bank if something were to happen, or to, before that happens, to be building and maintaining the other places that can sort of stand in if DeVoe Bank were to disappear. But it is certainly an ephemeral island. We had nights where we're in those blinds filming Wimbrel, and the high tide just comes in and floods out the blind, and we're sort of just stuck in there because you can't come out while the Wimbrel are roosting there. It's really sensitive. They're, as a flock, really sensitive to disturbance. So point being, there were times when the surf was overwashing in the middle of the island, and you basically turned it into two little separate islands. Now that was the last few years. I just saw this morning in the New York Times sort of the statement of the firm statement of 1 foot of sea level rise by 2050, no matter what. So we're certainly looking at, hurricanes or not, we're looking at places like DeVoe Bank disappearing, or at least hopefully places like DeVoe Bank migrating and reaccreting elsewhere. But yeah.
Kind of following up on that, you kind of are hinting at there may be other similar places that you're modeling your artificial islands after. Have you identified those spots? Are they higher in elevation than DeVoe? Or would they also get wiped out by 12 inches of sea level rise? How many places are there? Will the birds move there? Did they move there in '79 after the island vanished? And things you probably don't know the answers to, but
Yeah. I would say that there are a number of places. There currently is no place like DeVoe in terms of scale and sort of perfection as far as Wimbrel are concerned right now. Like, to have, I think, coast-wide surveys from Texas all the way up through sort of the Northeast have not found anything comparable. They've found places that are comparable, but at a different scale, 2,000 Wimbrel. So if you had a lot of places that supported 2,000 Wimbrel instead of one place supporting 20,000, you might be okay in theory. So I think the model, I suppose, the Army Corps has a number of sort of approaches to engineering islands like this, and part of what we're hoping to do now, along with some partners at Manomet and sort of other shorebird biologists, is getting them to engineer islands a little bit differently to be a little more shorebird friendly. And that is sort of based on some of this observation of behavior at DeVoe Bank. So basically creating shallow slopes so that there is a bit of an intertidal portion of an island, rather than just sort of a circle with what they call riprap, big stone to protect it from erosion. Part of the answer there, I think, is that the exciting thing about working with getting the Army Corps engaged on this is that, they have these sort of federal mandates in the national interest to in other words, they're doing it all the time to dredge out these navigable waters, whether they're major harbors or the intercoastal waterway. So as they're doing that, they have that opportunity to place all that dredged muck from the bottom. They can either dump it offshore, as they historically would have done, or they can, use it and make islands. So I think that's the idea there, is that at least if islands are washing away, there's that opportunity every year, every 5 years, to replenish and rebuild.
Are there any options in the Bahamas? I mean, it looks like it's kind of on the same flyway, and as far as the Wimbrel goes, it's not that far.
Yeah, I don't know.
Make it an international project, I suppose.
Yeah, I don't know specifically, but I'm sure there are some. And I mean, I do think from a lot of the tracking data, Wimbrel they're bypassing the Caribbean mostly. They're using the Caribbean mostly on southbound journeys as sort of hurricane refuges. There's a few that winter, but it does seem like they're using those mainland coastlines, sort of
they get
Brazil
shot a lot down there too.
And then Atlantic seaboard. So I don't know if there would be roosting concentrations like that. The places might be there in the Bahamas. I'm not sure if the birds are there for that type of concentration.
Hi, me again. I was curious how this became so discovered. Do they come at night and leave in the early morning and just stay one night?
Yeah. So it is kind of hard to fathom something like that going unnoticed, especially by people like Felicia, who have spent 20 years going to places like DeVoe at all hours and seasons. I think essentially it is that they're coming in late, usually mostly after sunset, and leaving pre-dawn. So a lot of these places, they're seeking out the places that are most inaccessible. So people use DeVoe Bank, but there's other places that are going to be sort of those smaller equivalents where there's no access, or they're in the middle of a wildlife refuge and they found a little island in the middle of a marsh. They're seeking out the places where, by definition, there's very little disturbance and no witnesses to them gathering there. So it's I think it's an access thing. There were people that had their own suspicions locally that were seeing the flocks concentrating at peninsulas nearby and then sort of going off, and you'd have birders that were saying, okay, where we're seeing them, they're flying north at dusk, and then north of Charleston, people would say, oh, we're seeing them flying south at dusk. So there was a sense of this, but certainly the confirmation of the scale and the actual sort of coordinated tallies of getting birds coming from all directions and accounting for roughly half the population is the kind of the new thing.
Oh, another question, I'm sorry. The sandhill cranes in Nebraska hang around evidently for a couple of weeks while they're feeding. So these birds do not hang around to feed, they just...
Right, actually, no, so I didn't answer that part of your first question. You're right. They do spend weeks. I'm trying to recall sort of averages, anywhere from 3 to 6 weeks individuals are spending in this part of the coast. So as a whole, from sort of early April through late May, South Carolina and DeVoe Bank have Wimbrel in large numbers. So basically it's a daily commute for a few weeks at a time, where they're dispersing out from DeVoe Bank, dispersing into the salt marshes, up the different creeks and along beaches and things. But you're hard pressed to go, outside of dusk and outside of being right near some of these roost islands. You're really hard pressed to go birding in South Carolina and get a ton of Wimbrel on a checklist for eBird. there you're going to see 6 or 10 or 25, maybe 200 if you're lucky. So it's sort of these very rare little perfect moments where everything's happening, and they're just going to a couple rare places.
Andy, you said I think you said 1979, the island was completely wiped out by a hurricane. So one is, how long did it take to sort of reestablish as a meaningful habitat? But are there any theories? Half the birds weren't, I mean, they must have been someplace else. So what was any theories of what was going on?
Yeah. It's a good question. I mean, I don't know, actually. I don't know exactly how long it took. I think it sort of accreted back relatively quickly. I think the next year it probably wasn't much of an option for birds, but I think within less than 5 years, there was a lot of island back. That particular river is one of the few completely undammed rivers. So there is a lot of sediment, a lot of accretion at that river mouth. But in that season, I suppose I'm presuming it was a fall hurricane. And so it was the following spring that would have been the most, spring of 1980 would have been sort of the most absent as far as DeVoe Bank is concerned. And yeah, I don't know. I think they must have been, part of it, and this is sort of a theme for the challenges facing migratory shorebirds, long-lived, long-distance migration, is that they can absorb a lot of sort of degradation and threats that as individuals they're absorbing and surviving, but as a population they can't sustain. So for example, some of this tracking information is starting to show how they have preferences about where they're roosting, and DeVoe Bank is optimal. But there will be some birds that come to DeVoe Bank for a few nights of the year of the week in spring, but then there's a few nights where they have to forage too far away and they find another little more marginal place where they spend an hour or two in that night. A long-winded way of saying that there's a lot of places that they could go that simply are more costly to them, more risky, that they'll be depredated by a raccoon or a great horned owl if they're closer to land, and more costly to them. So if they didn't have DeVoe Bank for years at a time, that's where I think you'd start to see the accumulation of that impact, where enough birds are incurring enough energetic costs that you're starting to not have successful breeding seasons ultimately.
Andy, we have a question from Fred, which is which birds are more endangered, whimbrel or red knots? And do red knots also make use of DeVoe Bank?
Red knots do. They are, by some metrics, red knots are more endangered. They are the Rufa subspecies in that portion of the Atlantic Flyway is federally listed now as endangered. They do use DeVoe Bank, not to the degree that the whimbrel do, but they're there certainly. And yeah, which is more endangered or threatened is hard to say. And I don't know. I don't have sort of the numbers on hand of red knot population sizes, but they're not doing well. South Carolina and Georgia are major epicenters of horseshoe crab harvesting and bleeding for the pharmaceutical industry. And there are a lot of places just in the last few years where horseshoe crabs have been beyond decimated, completely depleted in a lot of parts of Delaware Bay is where a lot of that story is for red knots, but a really key part of that species migration is in Georgia and South Carolina. And it's not in good shape down there. So yeah, that's another one on the front lines of all these problems.
Andy, your filming is just beautiful, and I think you make a compelling case for saving places like the DeVoe Bank. I'm wondering if you could shed some light on what the challenges are in Hudson Bay and Tierra del Fuego for the Whimbrel.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think typically in the Arctic, it's mostly sort of climate change, more direct climate change related threats. So there's kind of two things well, there's a few things. So there's shrubification. A lot of the places I haven't been back to where we were in Churchill since 2013, and I think in that time, in those sort of 9 years, a lot of the places where we would have been finding nests of whimbrel will have had a lot more encroachment of shrubby vegetation instead of sort of tundra. So that's something that's pushing ranges northward pretty rapidly, converting their habitat into places that are less suitable. So there's that. There's the mismatch of the timing of insect food abundance. So with warmer, longer summers, whimbrel are sort of racing, and other shorebirds racing up to the Arctic to be able to actually have their chicks hatching in time to sort of be there and be growing when all these insects have hatched. So that's one of the main threats at the breeding grounds. Isn't sort of not a direct impact thing, but more of a climate change factor where, they're sort of in these narrow margins spatially and temporally of, they don't have time to deal with delays in South Carolina. They don't have some of that room for error. I think to get up to the breeding grounds and have a successful season. The whimbrel don't get down to Tierra del Fuego, so they're more in sort of the northern coast mangroves, and there's a lot going on there. There's market and subsistence hunting in a lot of those areas. There's a lot of development and aquaculture that's just sort of encroaching on those habitats. But I haven't been and don't have a lot of more specific insight about threats on the wintering grounds.
Andy, I've got a quick question. I've kind of noticed that whimbrel show up regularly here in Michigan, and do you know much about the migration pattern from DeVoe Island up to northern Canada? And do they all leave DeVoe Island like on the same day or right around the same time every year?
They really do. It's one of the coolest things. They that shot of them departing at the end of both of those films, that is essentially that particular shot's in the middle of May, but if that were May 24th, that would be sort of taking off from DeVoe for the last time that year, and they beeline from DeVoe Bank. They'll go straight, Great Circle route, so just shortest distance that takes them right across the Great Lakes, past Whitefish Point, and they're going then up to the western Hudson Bay and some of them beyond to sort of Mackenzie River up in Canada. So they do have basically a trajectory that shoots them right across, Michigan, the Great Lakes, Upper Peninsula. And the really cool thing is that, kind of tying back into that last question about climate change on the breeding grounds, they really are compressed at that point in the life cycle. They have to leave to get to the Arctic. Ready or not, they're leaving the East Coast at that point, and that point is basically May 24th, and that's been pretty steady as a date window. There's like a 4-day window where basically they're all gone. They're all making that leap to the Arctic, and those dates really haven't shifted in like the last many decades. That in various forms of data and records from birders, that's a pretty clear time that they're coming to Point Pelee and Whitefish Point and crossing the Great Lakes. So anecdotal evidence that they're doing the best they can to get up to the Arctic, but they're not really advancing their timing in the way that the Arctic is advancing its timing. I've not really seen that. I would love to see that in Michigan, some of those larger flocks, going past Whitefish or Point Moo or something, just seeing concentrations of them going over would be really cool.
We were really fortunate on the last Tuesday in May, probably 2018 or 19. We had a flock of over 100 Whimbrel just fly over when we were out at a Christmas tree farm looking for grassland birds.
Yeah.
And they were calling and we got some flight shots and it was just, I was insane anyway. Yeah.
Yeah. So for May 2019, there's basically, there's maybe like a 50% chance that those birds you saw are like in one of these shots in the film, which is pretty crazy to think about.
Really crazy.
I think close to 400 is the biggest group I've ever seen at Point Mouillet.
Wow.
That was 8 or 10 years ago.
Huh.
I had a question about it slightly different. With DeVoe being at the mouth of a river, what comes to my mind is all the toxins flowing down that river straight into DeVoe Bank from human waste and all that. I assume somebody's doing studies there. It appears that the birds don't really feed that much on DeVoe, and maybe that's why they're spreading around to the other habitats.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But are there any threats from runoff to DeVoe?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I don't have a good answer other than Whimbrel in particular. You're right, are very much foraging in the salt marshes. They really use DeVoe as a roost, and they don't do much foraging there at all. They sort of go into the middle of the marsh and spend their time on the soft mud. It's sort of in the oyster bars looking for crabs. And but yeah, I mean, I'm not sure. I don't know who is working on that. I know that the Edisto River, the North Edisto, is part of the ACE Basin. ACE Basin is acronym for, I don't know the South Carolina pronunciations for these rivers, but Ashepoo, Combahee, and Edisto rivers. There's these three rivers that sort of their deltas together form the ACE Basin, and it's a pretty wild, vast system of salt marshes and healthy rivers. So my hunch is that as far as river mouths go on the eastern seaboard, that one's got to be a pretty clean one as far as toxins go. But yeah, no, I'm not sure.
It looks like there's a lot of salt marshes there, which is probably the main scrubber.
Yeah.
For a lot of that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Another question from Fred. When you summered in Churchill, Manitoba, did you or the Whimbrel have any trouble with polar bears on the Whimbrel nesting grounds?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, they were around. We had to carry shotguns with us all the time, and
wow.
Cornell University and undergrads carrying shotguns was, that's a major bureaucratic hurdle, but Nathan Center took care of that. Props to him. But yeah, we had some incidents where we had to sort of, be shooting cracker shells and things at bears that were coming towards us, and racing back to the car kind of thing. So there were a couple, but mostly it's such an open landscape that you keep your head on a swivel and you avoid them, give them a ton of space. But they certainly drill that into you there that, these aren't grizzly bears. They're certainly not black bears, in that you're not going to have a lot of luck with spooking them. You kind of just have to avoid them, or they will be interested in you almost certainly, and they will be predatory towards you. So yeah, it was cool to see though.
Andy, it was May 28th, 2019, when we saw the big flock of Whimbrel
Yeah,
over Jerusalem Road. So those are your same birds.
that's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really cool. Right in that window.
Incredible.
Very cool. Yeah. Well, very much appreciate everyone tuning in and sitting through all that, and lots of you can reach out anytime if any other ideas or questions come up. And yeah,
Thank you so much, Andy. It was incredible to have you. We appreciate all of your beautiful artistry, your cinematography, your words. I have enjoyed many of your articles in Birding Magazine lately. And we're so proud of you and proud of the work that you're doing. And this was just a great testimony to how much you're impacting Whimbrels and other birds for the better of all of our birds.
thank you very much to so many of you, because this particular project has been as I think is abundantly clear in the scope of it, is very directly tied to all the support and mentorship that I had here in Ann Arbor. this was the full circle project for me that ties right back to those beginnings of things with Cornell and the work that I was able to do to go there. So I really appreciate this is a great community here and a great resource for young birders. So it's been great.
Thanks again. We like to give you a Washtenaw Audubon t-shirt, and we do complimentary memberships for our speakers. So if you can get your t-shirt size and your mailing address to Mike Sefton, I will get those items to you. Thanks so much again, Andy. We're just thrilled to have you.
Thank you all. Really appreciate it.
Wouldn't we be proud to see Andy Johnson wearing a Washtenaw Audubon t-shirt?
Yes, we would.
Yeah.
Gotta be on TV though.
Great to see everyone. Thanks for coming.
Thanks.
Thanks, Andy.
Thank you.